Hey everyone, welcome to another session of Siller and Cohen's Wealth Unpacked series. I'm Brian Gloria, here again with Josh Marriott. We're both private wealth advisors at Siller and Cohen. In this video, we're going to cover part 2 of 3 sessions on 529 plans. If you haven't checked out the first session yet, please visit our website. It'll help establish some foundational knowledge of how 529 plans work. So this time around, we're going to cover some of the most frequently asked questions that we've received. So the first and probably the most common question that we've gotten is, what if your child doesn't go to college? Josh?
Yeah, so if your child doesn't go to college, there are a number of options, and one being a more recent flexibility within 529 plans. But the idea that maybe if your child isn't going to college, maybe they're attending a trade school. And funds can be used for qualified education expenses that include trade schools, for instance, from an accredited trade school. So, maybe they're going back to be an engineer of some sort, or an electrician, for instance. So that's one option. Now, if your child started their own business and they're not going to college or trade school, you do have some other options. And one is to slide funds from one child to another. So let's say, for instance, my oldest, Austin, is opting not to go the higher education route in any way, shape, or form. I could slide funds with Austin initially being the beneficiary. I can change the beneficiary from Austin over to my youngest, Abby, and she could use those funds for her higher education. If you've already funded that plan, or if I've already funded Abby's plan, and I don't want to slide over, or Abby chooses also not to go to school, you can move them, if you're feeling generous, to a niece or nephew along the same generational line, or anyone along the same generational line, really, and not hit any estate tax planning problems. Another option is simply terminate the plan. I'm assuming you set it up and you were the owner of that plan. You could terminate that plan. Just be aware that if you do terminate that plan, you're going to pick up any gain as ordinary income tax. So gain above basis, your gain above your contributions, another way to say it, as ordinary income tax. And you're also going to pick up a 10% penalty. So you need to be aware of that. A final option, which is an offshoot of terminating the plan, is keep the plan open as long as you can. And that will allow you to at least benefit from tax deferral, right? That you're not going to have a tax drag on the funds along the way, similar to an IRA. And it may give you an opportunity to assess whether someone, maybe I would be going back to school for a couple of college credits, or to learn a new trade, or what have you, or maybe the kids go back to school, and maybe you can use those in the future, or you terminate the plan and you pay the taxes and the penalty down the line, but you've gotten that compounded growth tax deferred.
Right. Yeah, and the other piece of this that we get, pretty fair amount is, well, what if my child gets a scholarship, or, partial scholarship? And
Sure.
Obviously that's great news. You're reducing the cost of your overall education expense. But as it relates to the 529 plan, what you can do is take, non-qualified withdrawals up to the amount of the tax-free scholarship, penalty-free. Mm-hmm. So, you're going to still have to pay income tax on the earnings, not the full amount, just the earnings. But you won't be, hit with that penalty.
Yeah,
So,
good point.
Yeah. So, all right. So I think, another thing that's come up probably more recently as parents, are weighing the options between, public school and maybe private school for K through 12, what do we do with the 529s? Are there any options for that?
Yeah. So again, a more, as you noted, recent flexibility within the 529 plan structure. The federal government, and I make that distinction for a reason, the federal government has said you're allowed to use up to $10,000 per year for K through 12 tuition payments. Now, that's the federal government. The state has the ability to restrict how those funds are used. Unfortunately, New York at this time does not allow tax-free withdrawals for K through 12. Connecticut and New Jersey local states, they both do.
Right.
So it's something to evaluate in your overall education, planning, and funding. So one of the things that I'm going to turn to you, Brian, on, because I know you have some experience with this, is an interesting one. Can you fund a 529 plan for an unborn child?
Yeah, and this definitely comes up, I think, more as people start the family planning conversation. And it's something that, we've implemented, my wife and I. We did open up a 529. Obviously, you need to have a beneficiary on file and a social security number. So what we did was we just established it with her as the owner and the beneficiary.
Sure.
And, we're starting on that, getting into, being able to get the money working for us and getting some of the growth. And we're also getting in Connecticut, our resident state, we're getting the, deduction every year, the
Sure.
local state deduction. And, at some point down the road, if we have to gift it over, we have to be careful of any gift tax implications depending on the value of the 529 at that point.
Absolutely.
May have to, spread it out over several years. But for right now, I think depending on your circumstances, it's something that people can consider, and it's a good way to kind of get started.
Yeah, and get the clock started on that compounded growth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So one of the other things that actually came up as a question from one of my wife Michelle's friends is, if I do open up a 529, won't that impact, our ability to receive financial aid in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, a common question we get. And assets owned by parents for the benefit of kids is included in the financial aid calculation. And it will impact the amount of financial aid you can receive. The good news is it has less impact than a custodial account, for instance, an UTMA or UGMA, right? Those are considered to be owned by the children directly, whereas the 529 plan is considered for financial aid purposes to be owned by the parent. And there's a formula, and I won't get into the details, that suggests that assets owned by the parent are weighed less than assets owned by the child. So that's a positive, even though they're counted at a lesser amount. There is also good news coming in the future, in the 2024 education year, on 529 plans owned by grandparents for the benefit of grandchildren. So those plans historically have been considered outside of the computation, so protected and won't negatively impact the financial aid calculation until they're used. And once they're used to pay tuition in, let's say, year one, they'd be considered in year two as part of the overall asset picture and income picture for the student, and can reduce future financial aid. Good news here being that starting in the 2024-2025 school year, distributions coming from the grandparents level will be ignored for financial aid calculation purposes. So a little relief coming there.
Yeah, and it's funny, what we used to have to do is kind of plan on staggering when certain family members' 529 funds were used, depending on, because of that rule. So that'll definitely be great to not have to worry about that in the future. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up part two. Thanks for listening to this session of Siller & Cohen's Wealth Unpacked series. Again, feel free to visit our website for more insights and contact Josh or I directly with any questions or other topic suggestions. We definitely love hearing your feedback. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.